Haleh Liza Gafori is a translator, vocalist, poet, and educator born in New York City of Iranian descent. Her latest work is a translation of Rumi poems entitled Gold. I first heard one of her translations of Rumi sitting around a campfire on a breezy, sunny Sunday morning in Patagonia, Arizona. I was bit by the passion of that translation, and this conversation does not disappoint. Haleh and I converse about her being raised in a family that celebrates poetry, how a translator's work is never done alone, what clergy of today might learn from Rumi's transformation, and translating as a spiritual practice, and much, much more. As always, you can visit contemplify.com for the show notes on this episode and sign up for the monthly Contemplify non-required reading list. Also, visit Haleh at halehliza.com. That's HALEHLIZA.com. Now join me in raising a glass to my guest today, Haleh Liza Gafori. What's around you right now?
I am in Brooklyn, New York, and I am a 10-minute walk from Prospect Park, which is an oasis, a beautiful park. It's shaped like a pentagon, so it's easy to get lost, which was one of the motivations. It was the same guys that did Central Park, which is a rectangle in the middle of the grid of Manhattan. So you're never lost in that park. You kind of always know where you are. But Prospect Park is an interesting park, and it has all these kinds of hidden trails. And so I'm very happy to be so close to it and to have that kind of mystery that even though I know it so well, I still am like, wait, where's Flatbush Avenue in relation to where I'm standing? So it's wonderful.
It's fantastic. And
yeah,
we were just
and it's a beautiful spring day.
I'm so glad that weather is reaching you right now, because it's one of the perks of living in New Mexico is the sunshine has been a good friend for most of this year. And I keep thinking about my friends. I grew up in Minnesota, so the colder climates where spring is just peeking its head.
Yeah.
We were just talking about your name, and I'm very excited to find out the meaning of your name.
Yeah.
Could you unpack the of your three names? What's the history and origin of your name?
Sure. Well, my name, Haleh Liza Gafori. Haleh, my first name, is a Persian name, not an uncommon name, and it means the halo around the moon. My mother named me that. And Liza is just a name, Liza Minnelli, she heard it from her, the singer. And she just liked the name and thought it was a musical middle name. My last name is interesting. In a Sufi tradition, there are 99 names of God. And they're all kinds of words, related to love, related to forgiveness, related to kindness and generosity and all different characteristics. It runs the range, actually. And so my last name, Gafori, is correctly pronounced Ghafuri, and it comes from one of these 99 names of God, which is Ghafur. And Ghafur means forgiveness, but a very specific type of forgiveness that penetrates to the deepest crime. Or
Whoa.
Forgiveness for the deepest crime. And so if you change one of the letters in the name, or in the word, so Ghafur is one of the 99 names of God. If you say Ghafar, that's also another one of those names. And Ghafar means forgiveness, but it's the type of forgiveness that you repeat over and over again. So two different flavors, right? So if you or someone else is making the same mistake over and over again, you keep forgiving. Right, that's Ghafar.
That's incredible.
So kind of, yeah. And then Ghafur is for the deepest crime. So hey, that's
I love that it starts with Hail Around the Moon and then finishes with the deepest forgiveness possible. It's cosmic and relational in all the ways that bring forth, I think, a sense of wholeness, at least in my visuals of that imagery that comes with your name.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful.
In our podcast here, we like to focus on contemplative, and that can be a very broad word. It could mean very mystical things. It could also mean very philosophical or ruminating things. When you hear that word contemplative, how do you relate to it as for yourself or in your work?
Well, I certainly, meditative state comes to mind, reflection, taking some time to slow down enough to really see and sense reality, using the five senses, rather than sort of letting the mind run its own narratives, but actually slowing down, finding a quiet place to actually sense, and allowing that to kind of inform thought, I would say. A deep presence informing thought versus maybe a past-oriented or future-oriented mindset. I would say contemplative is very present-oriented state.
That rings true. And I can only imagine, I'm excited when we get to this point to talk about that kind of deep present state to translate somebody like Rumi, that it is not just an intellectual mental activity, that there is this sense of contemplative in the fullest way of that word can be expressed, that it brings in the full body, it brings in the mystical, it brings in the ancestral, the lineage, it brings everything into play as one translates that work.
You know, he's writing in form, meaning, you know, he's using a lot of times strict meter that he chooses and varies within a poem. So, you know, but he was a master of rhythm and rhyme, and internal rhyme, external rhyme. All these things are a lot of wordplay, and so translating that, you have to, I believe, as a translator, you have to let go of the sound and music of the original translation and contemplate, you know, the meaning, transmit the imagery, contemplate what he's packing in to this form, you know, because he's using, you know, maybe the word orde, for instance, not, but it also means a complex in the mind, like knots in the mind. He says, for instance, at the doorway to emptiness, all knots come loose. You know, and so this word Adam, which means emptiness, this word, you know, gere, he uses, an orde, both of which are referring to these types of knots. I mean, I think part of it is about living the poetry, you know, not just contemplating it, but living it. You know, going into meditation where actually I experience Adam, the emptiness, and understand or viscerally experience what he means. And that's a years of process of you know, and in a way it is, I'll use the word healing because it is healing. It's very healing poetry. It's uplifting poetry. It's healing poetry. It's intelligent. There's a lot of incredible imagery. It's aesthetically mind-blowing. So anyway, as a translator, you're kind of like taking this all in and seeing how you can really understand and live what he's saying and then translate it. You know, he says, eat my poems like Egyptian bread.
I love that. And it's very clear how much you have lived with this poetry, because your translations, I mean, this is a credit to you and to Rumi, but just the aliveness and the immediacy that's there. I can feel the craft of the translator at work in that, by the way that you get out of the way so that those poems can be expressed as freely and in a liberatory manner as possible so that they can strike the reader in the full-bodied way that one hopes poetry can do. It feels so fresh in that way. And that makes me so curious about who else has formed you. Like, so this is something I'd love to ask of. If someone were going to teach a class on the formation of you, what would be...
That's funny.
We'll let that settle in for a second.
Yeah.
If there's going to be 3 mandatory works, whether they're readings, art, or places that formed you that would be on that syllabus, what would be those 3 for today? You could change it tomorrow, but just in this moment, what would be those 3 formative works?
In a way, I'm tending right at this moment to speak of places, to speak of the jungle of South America, the jungles of South America, which I spent some time in. I'm also tempted to speak of, deserts that I visited. Anza Borrego Desert in America, the biggest desert actually in America, and the silence that I experienced there. I mean, it was loud silence. After a while, you're listening and you're hearing kind of almost drumming, as if the molecules are drumming. I mean, I wasn't on anything either. I mean, this is just from sitting there. It sounds like it was, but no, this is just from sitting and sitting in that silence for days and spending time there, spending many days in the jungle and listening to the birds. I mean, deep listening is a huge part of this philosophy, this modality that Rumi puts forth in his poetry. And, it was when he got into Sama, they call it Sama. So Sama is a word that means deep listening. It also means the whirling dance. And one could say that he wasn't really a poet until he started getting into this practice of Sama and really like surrendering to it, and in that state of deep listening, he found his voice came through, So I think for me at this moment, when I think about the formation of me really happens, meaning on a daily basis too, in those moments that I just take a few minutes to quiet my mind and listen, and then some kind of direction comes from that. I hear, okay, now I know what I need to do, and I move towards what I need to do. I also feel that the poetry of Rilke, the poetry of course, of Rumi, I mean, that's just been in my blood for so long. But the poetry of many American poets have influenced me and touched me deeply. So I would say all of that.
Nice.
Helps. I didn't name specific texts, but
that's okay. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a general sense of what has called to you and formed you as how it's arising today. As I understand it, your family would do poetry nights growing up. How much did that impact you on your own sense of the form, understanding and utilizing language in beauty and form? How did that impact you?
Well, I think it was more kind of unconscious when I was a child and adolescent. In that I noted, my parents are into poetry, and I would sort of take in some of it and hear my father recite and hear their friends recite. And I remembered, the rhythm, and I remembered the way it kind of altered the room every now and then, how a poem would be recited and suddenly the air had changed, even if for a moment something electric, something charged the space. In that moment, that poem was alive and causing a moment of kind of blooming, these things I could say about it. And sometimes, at that time I didn't understand the meanings. I mean, when my father was saying, Yek khane por ze mastan, mastan no rasidand, divanegan bandi zanjirha daridand. I didn't understand what he was saying, but what a beautiful sound. It kind of like gallops. And I've said this before, so I'm repeating myself, but it felt sometimes like the poems galloped across the living room, and I stood in the golden dust that they stirred in their wake, It felt like that, not necessarily knowing what was just said, but yeah, and so that stayed with me, and the transformative power of language, and also just the ability to be in love with language, to be turned on by language, And that is certainly something that I appreciate so much and continue to.
That's so great. I have two kids, 4 and 8. We've been trying to introduce them to poetry before we eat dinner just to read a poem. And my daughter has memorized one of Rumi's poems. And then because she kept repeating it, my 4-year-old son picked it up. So this is just last week. My wife told me this story, which I felt like I have to tell you because you play a role in it. Where so my son was at preschool last week, and he is kind of a quieter kid, but he keeps repeating this joke over and over and again. And the teachers are watching, and they're getting a kick out of it because he's going into wider and wider social circles, repeating this joke. And then all of a sudden he turns to the teachers and he starts saying, "Mickey, your naked freedom is your shield." And he turns to another teacher. "Taylor, your naked freedom is your shield." And he's just getting louder and louder,
wow,
just reciting that.
I love that.
And I was just dying laughing hearing that story.
Yeah.
And also just so happy too, like how great that it's being ingrained in him.
Wow.
2 seconds later, as my wife is telling me this, he comes out of the bedroom completely naked, wearing nothing but a smile. And he says, "Papa, your naked freedom is your shield."
Oh my God.
So then I respond, "My naked freedom is my shield." And we just keep going back and forth, getting louder. And and I was just so elated by the entire experience because a 4-year-old boy in 2023 reciting Rumi just has the fervor of it. Like he was reciting it in a way that like I couldn't help but respond in like. And I feel like that's the power of poetry, but also the particular power of Rumi and your translation, because it you have to respond. It's not a question of when or why, but how. Like, how are you going to respond to this poetry? So I just need to pass that your way because it's now it'll be part of our family lore. I think how poetry is in the bones.
Yes. And that he understands, or that he senses and feels the importance of that idea, that line, that when we are liberated in the mind, when we are truly free within ourselves and just open to this existence, to the present, a kind of strong surrender, a kind of fearless surrender, this, we are shielded by that, versus another option is to walk around, buried in doom-ridden narratives of what could happen or could not happen, and buried in layers of fear that then it's like that weakens us anyway. So what shield do we have really when we worry? Worry is not a defense, against anything really. Worry just drains our psyches. So this naked freedom is like, woo! Such a fearless presence. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that day was an incredibly hard work day for me. I don't remember any of the things I was worried about. But I remember that distinctly because it was an experience of that liberation, of that freedom.
I love it.
It's brilliant.
I love it.
He's a great kid.
It sounds like it. I love it. I mean, that's so cool. Just picturing a 4-year-old. I love it.
Well, you'll
have to send me a picture of him. You have to send me a picture of him.
I will definitely do so.
Yeah,
definitely. Your book, Gold, is so beautiful. This translation is,
Thank you.
as I've already kind of been spilling and my guts out about how much I love it. One thing, when I've talked to other translators, particularly those of mystical poetry, they often speak of not translating alone, that they feel some sort of guidance from beyond the veil or from in partnership with others. And you speak of your mother playing a role in this as well as others. I'm curious, could you speak about that kind of collective translation, whether it's in person or in presence and spirit?
Definitely. First, to speak of my mother, she and I sat for countless hours reading through the poems, discussing the poems. She speaks impeccable Persian, Farsi, and, was able to sort of, talk to me about certain things that I didn't get at first, or, and then we would dig in. Sometimes we would go into, these dictionaries that have compiled obscure and ancient meanings, so that, because sometimes there's a word that means something in contemporary Farsi, but meant something else 800 years ago, right. Or something related, but perhaps has a different flavor, so to actually go and dig sometimes for multiple meanings. So we did some of that together too, and my mother's grandmother was a storyteller. She loved telling stories, and she would gather the children around this thing. It's called a corsi. Corsi is when you have, like, say, a low table, for instance, you could have, or just some kind of structure. The Japanese do this too, I think. And then you're able to put some kind of heating mechanism, like coals, for instance, or something underneath it. And then you put a huge blanket over the table, and then everyone's under the blanket and just getting warmed by the heat under there, so it's like, if it's really cold, that like warms everyone up so efficiently, and it's so cozy. And so they would gather around the, sit with the corsi, and my great grandmother, my mother's grandmother, would tell stories. And some of those stories are things that are in Rumi's poetry, there are backstories or reference to. And so in a way, the torch passes on, and from her down the line. And I think from ancestors before. I mean, I feel very connected to these mystical poets, I feel spiritually connected to them. I feel that my own, challenges that I've had, they have the medicine for. I feel like we fit like a lock and key, with these poetic ancestors. I feel, they're in my blood, and they speak to, the issues that I need to hear about, they address things that really touch me,
I love
and things that I need as a human being to hear,
Yeah. They have the right, as you said, that lock and key. I love that metaphor in this particular way of they have the medicine that you need, and and the way that fits and heals cannot be understated. I think the power of mystical poetry in such a way. And I was elated and really enjoyed finding out that you're a vocalist who sings Rumi's poems as well. And I'm curious, what is the difference or significance for you between singing a poem or a few lines from a poem versus reading them aloud? Is there a vibrational difference? Is there how does that impact you as the one who feels that poem flowing and coming and sharing it with an audience?
Yeah. And also, when I'm doing the singing, I'm singing in Persian, and when I'm reciting in English typically. So it's not just that I'm singing versus reciting. I'm also singing in Persian versus reciting in English. So they are very different. So they're very different feelings. And, I was born in New York. I grew up mostly in Jersey. So I am very, very Iranian by my genetics and the culture that I grew up with in my family, and very, very American, because I, was born here and raised here. And so when I stepped outside of my house, there was no Persian, there was no Iran. It was just America, and so, but I was moving between these two worlds, as most, children of immigrants do. And so in a way, it's kind of like I'm in the way that I would step out of a house into the different territory and then go back into the Persian, it's the same thing with the singing versus the reciting. I feel like I'm diving into this sea and then I'm diving into that sea. And the English is very, I have this wonderful mentor for a while named Fran Quinn. He's a great poet. And he said to me, Haleh, poetry is conversation. Poetry is speaking, and so there is I embraced the music of contemporary American poetry and language, the music of it. I'm speaking as I naturally speak when I'm reciting these poems, transmitting Rumi's images and messages in this language that I speak, and so it feels very comfortable when I recite the poems, and I know them by heart by the time I'm done. I know almost the whole book by heart, just because I've worked on them so much that it's like, I go down the length of the page. It's kind of like it's like a sculptor with a chisel. I don't know if sculptors work like this, but I always imagine it like if they were making, say, David or something, and they're going down the body. They probably don't do it this way, but I'm just saying, like, if they were to go down the body and then again from head to toe, and then again from head to toe. And so I'm moving down the page, crafting and revising. And so by the end, I know it by heart. So anyway, it feels very natural to recite. And then the singing is kind of like a pleasure. It's just a pleasure to sing those rhythmic words. They're so rhythmic, and it does feel like a different flavor of experience. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh yeah, I was just so curious. It's so so lovely to hear these multiple expressions, and one of the things I love about translators and the work that you all do, especially on mystical poetry like this, is the intimacy that you have with the poet and the poetry itself. And I don't know of any other translators who also will sing and have this performance that is not just reciting, which of course is also a very elegant, beautiful performance, but to hold the multivocality of it, I just think is so rich as a reader and listener, to hold both of those and to experience the fullness of the intimacy of the work that you do in translating a work like Rumi's poetry.
It's quite entertaining for me.
I bet. One of the things I've heard you say is you connect Rumi as like an alchemist, and I think that's such a rich metaphor. I wonder if you can unpack that. Why would you consider Rumi an alchemist for what his poetry does?
Yeah. Alchemy is, of course, transforming base metal to gold. And in this case, we're not talking about material. We're not talking about matter, but we're talking about transforming kind of like, let's say, a base state of mind to something just more expansive and more liberated and really more relaxed. I mean, in a way, this alchemical process that I feel he and the Sufi mystics discuss so much, is really about, it's about transforming consciousness, and from a kind of stifled, very self-absorbed, often prone to fear, prone to, say, lust for dominion, to hoarding, to controlling, from that kind of state of mind, which is an option for us. We can be in that state of mind, and we can stay there. But the Sufis are inviting us to say, look, recognize it, that it's a possibility, and we all can fall into that space that feels can feel small, can feel tight. Like, take off the tight shoes. He says in gold, the translation reads, "I'll be frustrated, dull, and barren as stone if I don't step out of my petty self, take off its tight shoes, and wade into rubies." And it's like, oh, okay, let's wade into rubies. What does that mean? I'll do that. And then he follows that with, how many eons must pass before the treasures I find here appear again? Why ignore them now? So when we step out of this kind of self-absorbed self into sort of a more relaxed state of existence, we can open our eyes to the wonders more easily. And we're not ignoring the treasures that are here. Are we going to wait until I don't know if he meant by how many eons was past. Is he saying we're going to come back around to this place? Maybe so, maybe not. Who knows? We don't know. That's one of the big mysteries. But the point is like, we're here now, and it's quite an extraordinary opportunity to be a human. It's a challenging thing, but I mean, it's a real gift to be able to be human. And so the Sufis are asking us, let's optimize this experience. Let's take the time, to go, if we're going to learn how to, build a skyscraper, why don't we learn also how to feel well inside? Mm-hmm. Why? And then take that feeling and allow it to radiate outward and allow ourselves to act on that. Because when we feel well, really well, in that we're not, so caught up in these, look, the lust for profit has wreaked havoc on this earth. The lust for dominion and lust for profit. And it comes from, many kinds of stifled place. Of course, we all need to eat food and we need shelter. We need things. I mean, I have this, poem where I say, two-legged mammals with no fur. We need so many things to keep us warm, Yes. And we do. And so we do. So it's understandable that we might. But anyway, the point, might get obsessed about these things. But anyway, the point is like, how do we then balance that then with a recognition that if we do actually relax in this existence, we can have a better life on this earth for everybody, and we can optimize this finite experience. And, we don't need to drop bombs on each other. We don't need to pollute the rivers. We can actually see the magic of them, the magic of ourselves and the magic of each other, and walk in praise and reverence.
I love it. I love the way that no matter what question I ask you, there's a passion that comes out. And Rumi, the poetry of Rumi spills out of between. I wonder what it's like to be your friend and just hang out on the regular.
That's Rumi funny.
Does Rumi spill out in every, or not even just Rumi, poetry in general? Because I find this with friends who have memorized poetry or just, scholars in their own right, where they can retrieve these beautiful lines that are so pregnant with the moment, and then they deliver them, and it's such a gift. Is that part of your role in your friend group and how you show up?
Yeah, I mean, and I have to say, I mentioned Fran Quinn, but like Fran Quinn is someone who has memorized so many poems, and I love when people can do that. I love that, I appreciate it so much. And yes, I certainly have so many Rumi lines, spinning, moving through me and so many things remind me of him. And he's spoken to so many things that there's so many moments where he's relevant. So yes, I quote him a lot. And sometimes I say, oh guys, I have to mention this Rumi line. Don't get tired of my Rumis. And they're like, no, we like it. That's good that they like it, because yes, I do quote him a lot. I was at this dance festival, and I was doing a performance and a workshop there. And at the end of it, there was this integration circle where people were talking about their experience. And there was a 16-year-old there. I think he was about 16 years old. And he said, this weekend was amazing for me. He said, I always thought dancing was just kind of like about having fun and, you kind of, you're joyous and you dance. And he said, and I came here angry and depressed, and I felt myself dancing through my anger and dancing my depression out of my system, at least for now. And he said, and I felt like I made room for joy. And then I said, oh, I got chills. I just even thinking about him saying that again, I got chills again. And I immediately thought of the line, let 7 streams of, grudges and denial weigh on the chest. Let 7 streams of water wash them away. I'm sorry, let me do that again. Grudges and spite. Here, I opened the book. I don't know everything perfectly about it. Grudges and spite. Here we go. Grudges and spite. And he was talking, of course, of anger and depression. Grudges and spite weigh on the heart. Let 7 streams of water wash them away. Make room for love's wine. Be its cup. And so in that moment when he was speaking of dance, I was feeling dance as the 7 streams of water for him. And this idea of making room for emotions, making room for love's wine, making room for joy, because some of these emotions crowd, they take up so much space and they weigh us down. And so this idea, again, this is the alchemy that we were speaking of deciding, recognizing, I'm feeling this anger, I'm feeling this fear, what can I do with it? Am I going to bury it? Am I going to deny it? Am I going to go dissociate? Am I going to avoid it? Am I going to numb it out? Or am I going to, I'm going to acknowledge that it's here and work with it and do something with it? And transmutation of it is possible. It's certainly possible. People are doing it all the time, and they're making room for different emotions. And when he says in that same poem, he says, okay, this is one I don't know by heart, so I'm looking for it. Well, where did it go? He says, be a stranger to yourself. That's a very interesting line. But that idea of allowing yourself to do the unfamiliar and to not necessarily stay with the emotion that's habituated in your being, if it is something that is, on the heavy side, on the stifled side, to say, all right, you know what, this is very familiar, but I'm going to try something else. I'm going to make room for something else.
That's the freedom enacting itself in that moment. I think that's so rich. I love how that poem came to you in the midst of that, in response to this young person and the dance, and the way that the metaphors could then become translucent into the context of what was happening.
Exactly. That dance as water. Yes. Mm-hmm. As a cleansing force. Dance as a cleansing force. Yeah.
And that, to get the pain away, as even if it's just momentary, to make room for the joy of what he seemed to be calling to him. Is there a line that's...
And it was funny...
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, but don't forget what you were going to say. His father was there, and his father was at the retreat, which was so sweet. I mean, the father and son came to this retreat together. And I remember when I started talking and I said, what you just said, speaking to the 16-year-old, reminded me of this Rumi line. His father just lit up, with like pride in his son. It was so touching because he saw his son's intelligence, affirmed in that moment. It was really beautiful.
I love that image. I love that image. I was going to ask, is there a Rumi line or a couple lines that have been teaching or instructing you right now, like that keep coming up, that they're calling you to pay attention to something? Because I think of myself in the ways when I try to memorize poetry, which is, nothing in comparison to how much you have, but like even what my son and daughter have memorized in that one line, it continues to arise in occasions when I need to hear it. Has there been lines of recent that Rumi is is speaking to you for your own kind of instructional becoming in this moment?
Yeah, well, I'll say at the beginning of the process, certainly lines which I have shared many times. Pambe vas vas birun kon ze gush ta be gushat ayad as gardun khorush. Take the cotton of the mind's doom-ridden chatter out of your ears. Hear the booming voice of the heavens. Hear the roar of fate. Hear the ruckus the muse makes. So this vas word that means the doom-ridden chatter that spins in the mind and is very noisy, takes up a lot of space. You could think of it within one's own mind, which is usually how it's used. But also one could think of the paranoid narratives that spin around in our media, in social media, and how this is kind of these doom-ridden stories. They clog the ears. It's like they stuff the ears. They make so much noise. So that's why it's like pambe. Pambe means cotton. So as in cotton, like plugging up the ears. Take the cotton of the mind's doom-ridden chatter out of your ears. Hear, and then hear the other possibilities that come from silence, that come from when you quiet your mind, that is, that come from just listening to silence for a moment. And, this idea that there is a kind of, I do believe this, I really believe that we can hear all kinds of levels of instruction, and the most expansive, this divine voice that speaks to us is very real. And I don't want to sound like it's so personal. The relationship with the unfathomable is so very personal. And in my view, it's because it's a relationship with the unfathomable, which is something we can't sense really with our five senses. It relies on the imagination. And so therefore, to talk about it and sort of like, sometimes sounds kooky to somebody. Because it's so personal, actually. It's so intimate. Right. It's so intimate. And that's why I believe that the relationship with, spirit or the unfathomable is so intimate, is so personal. We don't really need to ever impose our view on anyone else, and how is it possible that everyone could agree on what the unfathomable is? The unfathomable is the unfathomable. How are you interacting with it? How are you engaging your imagination in order to create your vision of it that feels real to you? What is that for you? And so, but when he says, hear the voice of the booming heavens, one can imagine, one can decide what that means to them. I decided to unpack the word and put 3 statements, because he says gardun. Gardun means the heavens. It means fate. It also is the kind of the ether, right? The heavens, the ether. So khorush means a loud sound. It's a booming voice. It's a roar. It's a ruckus. And so what is the etheric voice? What is the voice in the ether? For a poet is the muse, and when he quieted his mind, he heard poetry streaming through him, and he was spontaneously just reciting it. Yeah. So he was plugging in. He was unplugging the chatter, pulling the plug on the chatter and plugging into something else is what I mean to say with all of this.
I love it all. Part of what is flashing before me as you were sharing was my own sense of the divine, the unfathomable, the beloved is just that vulnerability of constantly pouring yourself out. And then you have folks who are conduits who are going to plug in that way and be able to express it, to share that in their own form. But like you said, it's so personal. It's going to look different for each articulation of that. And for me, that's something to be celebrated and to enjoy and be like, oh, wow, this is how you see and how I can step into your own lens and perspective of that experience. And here's what mine is like. And
yes.
I don't know if you've ever heard this myth before or if I've just been hanging out with too many Franciscans, but there's a myth that Franciscans tell of St. Francis and Rumi meeting in a tavern and appearing drunk on the love of God. Have you heard this before? I'm just curious if this is only in those who are hanging out in the Franciscan circles are chattering about that.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. I haven't. I mean, of course, there were incredible people alive in Rumi's time, including Dante as well. But I've never heard of this story. I've wondered. They were reading the same, astronomy books. They had the same conception of the 9 spheres of heaven, not 9 planets, but 9 concentric rings. So in a way, they were talking to each other through their books by thinking about the same books and writing poems that reference them. But no, I haven't heard about this. Francis of Assisi. Where was the tavern?
Well, because Francis, I'm gonna shortchange my own sense of history here, but like Francis went to try to be a embodiment of resistance to the Crusades.
Yes.
And so he went to try to be a mediator. And then he did this a few times. And on one occasion, they say that, and again, there's no proof of this, but just the myth of it, I enjoy so much, of these two mystics meeting beautiful. In a tavern.
Yeah, I love it.
Love drunk on God, on the divine, and that exchange of what would have happened. I don't even care if it's true. I just love that sense of two big souls meeting in a tavern, and just that exuberance overtaking the place. And of course, what else could they be but drunk? And I just so enjoy that imagery. I just didn't know how wide that myth had circled out into beyond those that I am in conversation with. But
I don't know. I love it. I love that vision. I like it. So sure, but I know that some people would say that the tavern is not a literal place, right? The tavern that Rumi refers to, the wine that Rumi refers to, is only and completely metaphorical. Some people say that. I don't necessarily believe that. I think it was both. I think that there very well may have been a kind of interesting wine. There is, Shams did drink wine on occasion. So how is it that Rumi didn't? I do think that there probably was a literal wine, and that this wine might have been a very interesting recipe. That there might have been, I don't know, Syrian rue. I'm not really sure, but some kind of perhaps psychedelic aspect to the wine. I don't know. But sometimes when you read some of these poems, you wonder, this sounds like very much like how people describe a DMT trip. Ghazal number 1585. Ghazal number 1585. Tell me that doesn't sound like a DMT trip. Now I'm not saying that there was DMT in the wine, and I'm not saying that there was necessarily wine. I don't know, but it's interesting and it's possible. And there is a story that Shams, sent Rumi to the Jewish neighborhood where they were making the wine, told him to buy a jug of wine and walk home with it in front of everyone so that everyone could see the sheikh walking with the wine, which was considered a blasphemy, but he wanted him to be free of what people thought of him, free of from guarding a reputation. There's a wonderful part in one of the poems that says, the cupbearer raises the bottle. It says, to drink this wine is not a sin. To feel ecstasy is not a sin. Feeling guilt for feeling pleasure, that's the sin. That's the chain. Shatter it. Tear it off. Then invite the Puritans over. Today is an invitation to ecstasy. Let them know. If they judge, let them go, let them talk, let them smear your good name. You'll have less to guard. Let them smear your good name. You'll have less to guard. Lover, the eyes of lovers behold you. Your friend is the sea. And this again, shoreless, boundless sea. This is your real friend. This is the soul energy. This is the unfathomable. This is the love, the capital L love. When he says love is a shoreless, love is an ocean, no borders, no shores. Drown there and you won't lament it. The drowned have no regrets. So drowning in that sea, go ahead, is the invitation. Don't worry about what they think. That was actually, and it's funny to think that Rumi even had to be told that. And then he even tells us, he says specifically, pay no attention to what the gossips say. So there is a real humanness to this whole story, where just like people might worry about what people are saying about them today, he was trapped by that too. And Shams was like, let that chain go,
Yes. I do want to know, what do you think that religious preachers of today could learn from Rumi?
What do I think religion? Well, I guess it depends who we're talking about, which religious preachers. What do you mean specific? Yeah, tell me more.
Well, part of what I'm thinking about the way that Rumi was a prominent teacher.
Yes.
Prominent sheikh, and that he, as the story you just told, turned his life completely upside down in a conventional way, like in an unconventional way. He left convention.
Yes.
And his message of love and liberation came out in the form of poetry and such beauty. And the only time that I hear of religious preachers making the news today is when something vile has happened or they're spewing hate speech. And I know of many, many beautiful spiritual teachers in the world. But I'm thinking of like the local common, whether it's a sheikh, a rabbi, a pastor in their own community. What could they learn from Rumi to serve that community's own transformation?
I think everything he says is useful. I mean, I think that, why paint night over nightless day? Every religion has love, but love has no religion. Love is an ocean, no borders, no shores, from that same poem. But this idea that, at the root of the root of the root, he talked of his book, The Masnavi, which was his 6-volume ode to liberation. And he says, this book is the root of the root of the root of the root of religion, And so what is at the root? What is the root of this all? What are we really trying to do here? Is remember our connection to each other, to the water, to the earth, to the heavens, to the skies. I mean, what is this existence? I think a little bit of bewilderment. Let's say that. Rumi gives people the permission and the invitation to not be so self-righteous, to be bewildered, to say, Nemidonam, Nemidonam, Nemidonam. He has a poem where he says over and over again, Nemidonam, Nemidonam, which means I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And I think he wants to invite us to say, don't pretend you know everything. I mean, a lot of these people that take these positions, they have their narratives that they believe are correct and right. And so that would be one thing I think that Rumi would immediately, didn't believe in dogma. He believed in, and there's a line, asrar dar miyan avar, which is, could be said, tell me your secrets. I translated it literally because that's it's kind of an expression, but sort of, but I chose to translate it literally because it echoes so many of his other lines in other places when you translate it literally, and it's more interesting to me. It's put mystery in the middle. Put mystery, because it is in the middle of your existence. The question mark is everywhere. The mystery is everywhere. The grand, unfathomable, mystery of where we came from and where we're going is always there. But even daily life is a constant mystery. There's one mystery. We don't know what's going to happen 1 minute to the next. So let's get comfortable with that. Let's put mystery in the middle. Let it be the fire where we warm our hands. We don't have to be so afraid of it.
Wow. That is a rich, rich way to end. I do want to ask one final question to make sure we stay embodied in all of this process is, if you're going to pair our conversation with a drink, what drink would it be and why?
Araq Gol. This is something I drank in the Shiraz. I was in Iran once for 2 weeks in 2003. And I went to the city Shiraz, which means Shahraz, which is for Shahraz, the city of mystery. And speaking of mystery, and I drank this drink there called Araq Gol, and it was the most fragrant, floral, rose water and different flowers, like sort of just blooming from. I was like, what? I drank it, and I just felt transported as if I was in a garden 2,000 years ago in Iran. I mean, it was something special, and I've never had it again. But I would get that for all of us. Wow. I would get jugs and jugs of it to serve at this conversation. That's what I would want.
What an image. I would love to someday clink a glass with you with one of those and hear you recite more poetry. Thank you so much for this. One quick edit. Haleh notified me after our conversation. The gazelle she mentioned at the end there is actually 1855, not 1585. Again, it's supposed to be 1855, and you can find that on page 29 to 30 in her marvelous book, Gold. Thank you for listening to Contemplify. May it refresh you and be a contemplative refuge. And perhaps, maybe a moment or two will walk with you along the rest of your day. You can slide over to contemplify.com to find the show notes for this episode, including links to the resources mentioned in this conversation. And while you're there, you can also sign up for the monthly Contemplify non-required reading list, which I tee up with a contemplative musing, then reflect on a few books that have come across my desk, and wink at the art and articles stilling my soul. If you're enjoying Contemplify, please rate and review it on your podcast player. The internet's a huge place. This helps spread the contemplative cheer. The theme song for Contemplify is called Langside by Charles Enns and Darren Hovius. Fellas, thanks as always. For Season 4 of Contemplify, I want to offer a nod. This is not an ad, but a nod of appreciation. This nod goes out to the Center for Spiritual Imagination. The Center for Spiritual Imagination exists to deepen and enrich human relationships with God, self, and neighbor in new and ancient ways. I can say with certainty that some of you listening, the offerings from the Center for Spiritual Imagination are exactly what you have been longing for. Check it out at spiritualimagination.org. And as always, I'm looking forward to bringing you more musings and more conversations with contemplatives in the world here in the near future. Until then, be well.